Hello, good day. This is your instructor in COM 304, Module 1, Engineer Elton Ian M. Ho, Introduction to Animation. Start with animation techniques. No? So what is a really animation? Okay, animation has certainly come a long way in the decades since its debut in the early 1900s. So the techniques used by animators to bring characters and stories to life have improved, no? Immeasurable or immeasurably over the years. Yet there remains only three primary types of animation. So the first type of animation is the traditional, and the second is the stop motion, and the third is the computer, using computer. So traditional animation, no, made its debut in 1906 with a short film featuring different facial expressions. So the genre allows for the illusions of animated movement due to the frame-by-frame manipulations that will be discussed no, niya sa ato ang video nga uh, 8% of drawings and illustrations. So frame by frame. Sa ato ang module 2, no, there will be a tutorial on how to create a simple 2D animation using After Effects with a frame rate, no, na frame rate. So the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937 marked the first time that traditional animated films began to be taken seriously by the Hollywood community and audience alike. Okay, so that is the story. Then the stop motion animation, the second, no, is actually predates traditional hand-drawn animation. No? The first attempt is the Humpty Dumpty Circus was released in 1898. So there's little doubt that the biggest hindrance, no, to stop motion animation success is its time-consuming nature, as animators must move on object from frame at a time to mimic movement. So from this side, okay. So just what is computer animation? So computer animation is the process used for generating animated images by using computer graphics. So the more generated term, a general term computer generated image array encompasses both static scenes and dynamic images. So while computer animation only refers to moving images. So the term computer animation itself broadly covers a wide variety of genres and applications, though the simplest way to break it down is into the categories of 2D and 3D animation ang computer. Okay, what is vector animation or 2D animation? Okay, 2D or short for two-dimensional is sometimes also called vector animation and is typically done in programs like Macromedia Flash and Macromedia Director. So, vector graphics is the use of a geometrical primitives such as points, lines, the curves, and shapes or polygons, which are all based on mathematical equations to represent images in computer graphics. The most familiar form of 2D animation can be found just by turning on your TV on a Saturday morning, additional cartoons, which are progressing more and more into the digital realm. So, vector animation 2D, you probably see simpler animations every day just while surfing the web in the form of advertisement. So, sulit ng mga GIF or itong mga animated na GIF. E-cards and cartoon shorts. So, vector animation is also useful in designing interactive interfaces for the web. Okay, 2D animation, true to its name, is rendered in a two-dimensional space, the X and the Y. So example for the 2D animation is this one. No? So 2D siya, no? Because dili ni siya pwede ma-rotate, no? Nga mo atubang sa imo ang course. Kinahanglan drawingon sa nimo na every movement, no? Every movement niya is plan siya is separate nga drawing. Mura siya og ganang sa flipbook, no? Sa flipbook. Okay? So 3D animation, however, is rendered in a virtual three-dimensional space. So the X, the Y, and the Z using polygons captured by various virtual cameras to film the animation. So 3D animation has a variety of applications from video games to animated films. 3D animation is also used to render many of the special effects seen in live action films, removing the needs for skilled model sets or stage stunt. Software like Reno, 3D Studio Max, or others are required for 3D animation. But I am using only Adobe After Effects, no, for our 2D and 3D animations tutorials. So this one, no, is the sample for a 3D animation. No? Because all nga makita nato diri sa kanin siya, no, or muna siya real siya or tinuod. Okay? So where do we start with animation? So the first is what we call the sequence. No? Sequence. So sequence is a series of individual events that are put in a proper order. It is a roadmap of events or steps to follow. Examples includes the alphabetical and numerical order, no? Or a recipe, assembly instructions, alphabetical start from 0 to 9 and numerical from A to Z. And a recipe, no? So first and bottom, most of step by step process. So before any recipe, no, cartoon, commercial, or TV shows is made, the chef, okay, cartoonist or filmmaker needs to know the proper sequence or what order to put things in. So that is called the sequence. No? So the next is the storyboard. A storyboard is a special type of sequence. It provides a visual description of the shots in their proper order or sequence of your production. So each scene should have its own storyboard, which contains information on graphics, video, sound, text, audience interaction, color, type, fonts, and type size, and so on and so forth. In other words, everything necessary for crew members involved in the production to do their jobs. So these are the storyboards. No? What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? And what happened next? So example, this one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Okay. There could be a sequence of story. What happened next of your animation. So character development. So 6 basic emotions, no, sa atuang ibutang, no, sa atuang animations. So we have the fear, the anger, okay, the disgust, the sadness, the joy, and the interest. Okay. So fear is perception of physical or psychological danger or threat. And anger, belief situation is not what it should be. The restraint, interference, or criticism is illegitimate. Disgust, getting rid of or of getting away from a contaminated bodily. So, among siya mga no, basic emotions nga atong ibutang no, sa atong animation. So, ginahanglan na fear, na anger, na disgust, na sadness, na joy, and na interest no, ang atong animation. So, ito siya mga samples no, sa atong mga emotions. So, theater or stage design, no? So, siya mga tools or equipments na ginagamit for animations. So, mga dagag, mga lights, no? And we have the background, big images, then there will be a characters, no? Nga sa ito ang animation sa character. Okay, draw, and draw. So, drawing, no? Muna siya yung mga pasabot sa 2D animation, no? So, first frame, diri ang ball. Second frame, diri ang ball. Third frame, diri ang ball. Second frame, diri ang ball, and diri, and so on and so forth, no? So, dugay siya mahuman. So, sa flipbook, every page is separate motion, no? Sa ato ang animation. Okay, so for to begin, akong ginagamit lang is After Effects, no? After Effects. So the 12 principles of animations, we have the squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, okay, straight ahead action and pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow in, slow out, slow in, slow out, arcs, secondary action, the timing, the acceleration, the solid drawing, and the appeal. Okay. So first is, of course, the very important sa atong animation is natay audio or sound. Okay. So first is the squash and the stretch. Okay. The squash and the stretch principle is considered the most important of the 12 principles of animation. When applied, it gives you animated characters and objects the illusions of gravity, weight, mass, and flexibility. So think about how a bouncing rubber ball may react when tossed into the air. So the ball stretches when it travels up and down and squishes when it hits the ground. So when using squash and stretch, it's important to keep the object's volume consistent. So when you stretch something, it needs to get thinner, and when you squash something, it needs to get wider. So example for this one, no, na animation sa squash and stretch is, so squash and stretch. So this one is the sample. So that one. So going upward, okay, mo kanya mo inat, so mo stretch siya. And pag abot sa taas mo action siya o ano, compress. And pagbalik, okay, so mo inat siya because of the weight, no, and the gravity. Then after that one, so ang weight taas mo compress na siya. And bounce, no, it could be a bounce. Okay. So that's it, no? So that is the squash and stretch. Okay. So the next is the anticipation. Anticipation helps to prepare the viewer for what's about to happen. So imong anticipate. So when applied, it has the effect of making the object's action more realistic. So consider how it might look if you were to jump in the air without bending your knees, no? Makalukso ba ka kung dili mo pilon ang imong tuhod, or perhaps to throw a ball without first pulling your arm back. So dili yun yung makuan. So it would appear, no, very unnatural. So in the same way, animating movements without a flicker or anticipation will also make your motions seem awkward. So still and lightless. So wala siya kinabuhi. So the sample for anticipation, okay, is this one, no? Anticipation, inani siya ang ay anticipate nimo sa imong animation. Okay. So kung mo kuan siya, no, kung imo siyang gi-shake, so may possibility nga matumba siya, no, sa other side. But of course, there could be unbending, no, nga bawog-bawog niya, like this one, no. So that one. Okay. So at least na-anticipate mo nga kung ma-over na ang iyang pag-move, ma-out-balance siya. So that is what we call anticipation. Then the next is the staging. No? Staging in animation is a lot like composition in artwork. So what we mean by that is we should use motion to guide the viewer's eye and draw attention to what's important within the scene. So keep the focus on what's important within the scene and keep the motion of everything else of non-importance to a minimum. So itong mga gagmay kayo or gamay lang dili nato siya kayo. Pero of course, masadya po siya mag-pay attention sa tuwang viewer. Okay, so staging. Sample for staging is this one. Okay. So, na siya mga gagmay nga particles. No? So, of course, no? Nakafocus na doon sa kuhan. Pero, kung mag-move na ito ang mga gagmay nga particles, uh, ma-feel na ito nga part sila sa tuwang animation. That one. Okay? So, next is, so staging is the straight ahead. No? Straight ahead. So, straight ahead, action, and pose to pose. So, there are two ways to handle drawing animation: straight ahead and pose to pose. So, each has its own benefits, and the two approaches are often combined. No? So, ato siyang i-combine lang siya. Straight ahead action involves drawing frame by frame from start to finish. So, if you're looking for fluid, realistic movements, straight ahead action is your best bet. So with the pose-to-pose technique, you draw the beginning frame, the end frame, and a few keyframes in between. Then you go back and complete the rest. So this technique gives you a bit more control within the scene and allows you to increase the dramatic effect of the motion. So, okay, we have to end the show. So straight ahead action and pose-to-pose sample. So straight ahead and pose to pose. Okay. Okay. So as you notice no ang yang frame motion so itong balikon no. So gikan rin no ni pas siya din ni hinay ni pas. Okay. Ang yang changes no sa yang motion. So ano siya frame by frame no. But the time is different no, dili sila mapareha. So from start ni pas siya din pabot din ni hinay ni pas na pod na yan ni so muna siya ito ang pose no, straight ahead action, then mo action siya og pose no, then ano siya no, straight ahead na yung pose na yung straight ahead and pose. Okay, so na siya no, play pose okay, pose. Okay, so that is the animation no? Sa yung characteristic or what is this principles. So straight ahead. Okay, the next is the follow through. Okay, follow through and overlapping action. So when objects come to a standstill after being in motion, so different parts of the object will stop at different rates. So similarly, not everything on an object will move at the same rate. So this forms of essence of the fifth of Disney's principles of animation. So sa follow through and overlapping action. So if your character is running across the scene, their arms and legs may be moving at a different rate from their head. Okay. So this is overlapping action. Likewise, when they stop running, their hair will likely continue to move for a few frames before coming to rest. So this is follow through. Okay. These are important principles to understand if you want your animation to flow realistically. So example, okay, examples of follow through and overlapping, follow through and overlapping. Okay, this one. Okay, okay. So when you move, so the first no ang base na siya, mabilin ang imong head. Ngayon, of course, no, sa kusog, mabilin, there could be, and when you stop, no, ang possibility kani siya mulapaw, then nasa siya mo balik sa rest. Okay? So, that one. Okay. That is, we will follow through and overlapping action. Okay, so principle of animation. Then the next is the slow in and slow out. So the best way to understand, no, slow in and slow out is to think about how a car starts up and stops. Okay, it will start moving slowly before gaining momentum and speeding up. So the reverse will happen when the car brakes. In animation, this effect is achieved by adding more frames at the beginning and end of an action sequence. Apply this principle to give your objects more life. So, as yung notice na, gabalik-balik na siya mga frames nga word. So, ato na siya masabtan niya sa atong module 2 when we do the 2D animations no, sa After Effects. Kay, ang pag-move sa mga object or pag-animate, kinahanglan siya i-frame by frame. And for every frame, it could be equal a time. No? Kasi time, no? Sa kani siya nga seconds, unsay mahitabo no? Sa iyang animation. And after the next second, or unsa pa siya nga mga time imong iguan, what will happen next no sa imong animation. So muna siya nga na siya frame by frame. Okay, slow in and slow out. Example for the slow in and slow out. Slow in and slow out. Okay, this one is a sample. Okay. So this is slow in and slow out. Slow out, slow in. So slow out in and slow out. Slow in. Okay, so that's are the samples no sa ato ang slow in, slow out nga principle of animation. Then we have here next is the arc. Okay, so arc. No? Arc. When working in animation, it's best to stick with the laws of physics. No? Most objects follow an arc or a path when they're moving. And your animation should reflect that arc. For example, when you toss a ball into the air, it follows a natural arc as the effects of the Earth's gravity act upon it. So, balik na siya no, yung ilabay. Depende no, balik because ang imong ball so yun po sa gravity sa Earth with its mass no, saya kabugaton. So, example is one no, sa arc is this one. Okay, okay, that is the nag-form siya of arc. Okay, so this is sample for the arc principle of animation. And we have here the secondary action. Okay, the secondary actions are used to support or emphasize the main action going on within a scene. So, other secondary actions help add more dimensions to your characters and objects. So, for instance, the subtle movement of your characters here as they walk, or perhaps a facial expression or a secondary object reacting to the first. So whatever the case may be, the secondary action should not distract no, from the primary one. Okay, so example is secondary action. Secondary action, this one. May gamay nga lipatong. Okay. So this one is your secondary no, na mahitabo sa imong animation. Okay, that is what called secondary action animation or principle of animation. The next is the timing. For this principle of animation, we need to look the laws of physics again and apply what we see in the natural world of our animations. In this case, no, the focus is on timing. So if you move an object more quickly or slowly than it would naturally move in the real world, so the effect won't be believable. So using the correct timing allows you to control the mood and the reaction of your characters and objects. So that's not to say you can push things a little. So timing. Example for timing. Sorry, timing. This one. Okay. So hmm. So this one is hinay siya motulod no kumpara diri. But una siya og tulod pero ma-absent pud sa taas no. Mm. Mm. Ah, ang sa taas is constant no. So i-post lang. Okay, so as you notice no, ang time, okay? Ang timing sa taas no, constant siya no, ang iyang seconds. 1 seconds, 2 seconds. This sa pikas no, uh, sa first niya, pas-pas yung time. Ayan, ni nagka-lag ka no, ang iyang timing. And pag abot rin ni pas-pas mo siya. So, although, no, una ni siya, pero constant na yung time, ma-absent mo siya or magdungan sila, no? So, in this part, no, una, sa start niya, mag-una ni siya, pero because pas-pas po din siya, no? Quick iya, so mas the more po lang iyang paglabay. Then, may possibility nga magdungan sa abot, no? Bisag una ni siya, then, kani siya is ulahi siya pag-move, pero madungan niya kung sila. So, ito i-play. Okay. So, una. Okay, absent. Okay, so that is called timing. Then, the next is timing is the exaggeration. No? Too much realism can ruin an animation. So, exaggerated. So, making it appear static and boring. So, instead, add some exaggeration to your characteristic and objects to make them more dynamic. So, instead, make motion. No? Find ways to push the limits just beyond what's possible and your animation will pop. Okay, so exaggeration. This is a sample of exaggeration. Exaggeration. So this one. Mm. Mm. Okay, that is what we call exaggeration. Samples animation. Principles of animation. And okay, next is the solid drawing. So you need to understand the basic of drawing. This includes knowing how to draw in three-dimensional space and understanding form and anatomy, weight and volume and lights and shadows. Okay, while you can push the limits here too, it's important to remain consistent. So example for the solid drawing is this one, solid drawing. Solid, ulit naman. So that is a three-dimensional. No? So we have the front, the top, and the side. No? Kuan. So we have here the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z, no? Z-axis. So there could be three dimensions ang imong drawing, make it solid. Then the appeal, no? appeal. So your characters, objects, and the world in which you live need to appeal to the viewer. So it includes having an easy to read design, solid drawing, and a personality. So there is no formula for getting this right, but it starts with strong character development and being able to tell your story through the art of animation. So appeal. So this is mm, 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 mm. So that is appeal. Okay, then we are here. Uh-huh. The second, the last, no, appeal is the last, no? Yeah, principles of animations. We have references. We have here the images and graphics, no? Sa ilang mga sites. So before that, no, I'm going to show you first the the difference between the 2D and the 3D animations, no? Sa tuwang presentations nga makita nyo karon. Okay, so what is the difference between the 2D and 3D? Okay, the difference between 2D and 3D animation.
When we watch an animated film, it's very easy to notice the difference between 2D and 3D animation. Anyone can point out that this is 2D and this is 3D. But what is the core differences between the two, other than the visual result? What does it mean to make a 2D animation as opposed to making a 3D one? Well, actually the making process is very different. For starters, to make a 2D animation, you need to be able to draw. Everything you see in a traditional 2D animation had to be drawn, usually frame by frame. For a 3D animator, while being able to draw well is definitely an advantage, it is not mandatory. When you're animating in a 3D environment, you move the character kind of like a puppet, right there on the computer. Alright, so what does it really mean? In 2D animation, you draw the first key pose, and then the rest of the key poses. Now you need to draw all the frames in between them. Notice when the guy's arm is covered by its body, it's actually gone. If something is not shown in 2D animation, you don't have to draw it. If a character closes its eyes, the eyeballs does not exist anymore until I draw them again. This concept is one of the big differences between the two types of animation. That's because when you're working in a 3D environment, all the parts of your character are always there, and you have to be aware of them. While in 2D you just draw whatever is seen, and the rest is gone. Okay, so we all know that animating in 2D means drawing a lot. But what does it really mean to animate in 3D? How does it look? Well, let's see. This is a 3D model. It is rigged. That means that he is programmed with all the right virtual bones and controls to make it as easy for animators as possible to go ahead with animating it. Now this rig might not be as complex as what the big studios like Pixar and Disney use, but it is made with the same principle and concepts, and the animation methods are kind of similar in all places. So as you can see, this model has controls in every key position in the body. I can grab one of the controls and move it around, but that only explains how we can move the model, not animate it. Here they get a little bit more complex. Watch this window here. It's called a graph editor. 3D animation is all about graphs and curves. I know math and formulas don't belong in an artistic thing like animation, but here it is. Now this might seem a little overwhelming, but most of these controls have 6 different curves you need to manage, all at once. There's the translate curves, X, Y, and Z for up, down, left, right, closer and far away, and 3 curves for rotation, X, Y, and Z, also for the 3 axes of rotation. And mind you, this is just for controlling one hand. We have these curves for both hands, 2 legs, knees, elbows, neck, back, pelvis, hips, and each part of each finger. That's a lot of curves. Some of the controllers have even more than 6 curves. So yeah, an animator spends a lot of his time looking at these graphs and curves. So now we know about the curves, but we still didn't cover the animation process. So let's say this character wants to raise his hand. We'll go for the first frame in the timeline and make a keyframe. A keyframe is you telling the program you want the hand to be in this position at this time period, at this frame. Now we'll go 10 frames ahead in the timeline and move the hand up. Make another keyframe. You can see in the graph editor that there is a curve on the y-axis of the hand going up. That's because the computer interpolates the difference between the first and second keyframes you made. So an animator will do what we just did, but he will also move most parts of the body for every keyframe, and offset some of them and tweak them for hours and hours. After a lot of animating, the graph editor would look something like this. This window here is what 3D animators look at most of the day, while 2D animators mostly look at drawings. Another difference is the frame rate and what happens on moving holes. What do I mean by that? Well, in animation we usually work in 24 frames a second. In 2D animation that means that there's a drawing every frame 24 times a second. That sounds like a lot of drawings, but it's actually not that many. Because when there's no big or fast movements, you can settle for one drawing lasting for 2 frames. So that's actually 12 drawings per second. This is called working on twos, because you're making a change or a new drawing every 2 frames. When the movement is very still, you might even work on 3s and 4s, making a new drawing every 3 or 4 frames. You see that a lot in Japanese animation and stop motion. Sometimes they would hold the same drawing for many frames. In 3D though, it doesn't really work that way. When a 3D character doesn't move at all, even for 1 frame, it seems kinda wrong. It seems dead. Look at this example. The ball settles after a jump, and if we completely stop its motion, it seems like a mistake. While in this 2D animation example, it seems okay to hold the same drawing when the character hits a hold position. This makes it a challenge to do what is called a moving hold in 3D animation. A moving hold is whenever you need a character to do nothing, but still feel like it's alive. While in 2D and stop motion, you can settle for a new drawing every 3 to 5 frames, or even not have a new drawing at all for a few seconds. In 3D, we always gotta keep the character moving, even a little bit, and that's not easy. Well, that's it for now. There's of course a lot more differences between the 2 kinds of animation, but I hope this short overview gave you a basic understanding of what it means to animate in 3D as opposed to animating in 2D. If you have
Okay, that's it for our module 1 for the 2D and 3D animations, COM 304. Once again, I am Engineer Elton Ian, your instructor in 304.